from the University of Virginia Center for Politics.
Hello and welcome to the start of a busy week at the Center for Politics as we kick off our 27th annual American Democracy Conference. 27. Been there for every one. I feel like it too. I'll introduce tonight's guests for part one of the conference. These are the part one. I can't see them, but I think they're over there someplace. In just a minute, but first let me invite all of you to join us on Wednesday for part two. Our guest will be the Honorable Don Scott, the 58th Speaker of the Virginia House of Delegates and the first Black Speaker of the Virginia House of Delegates in the state's history. We'll cover the November elections, the upcoming inauguration of Virginia's first woman as governor, and the Democrats' new supermajority, 64 of 100 seats in the House of Delegates, and a lot more. That's Wednesday at 3 p.m. in Garrett Hall, right down at the end of the walkway on the lawn. I hope you can come. On Thursday, we'll welcome back special guest Senator Bernie Sanders, who loves my introductions, and Center for Politics scholar and CBS News chief Washington analyst Robert Costa. All the in-person tickets were claimed within hours. This guy is an incredible network. It's absolutely amazing. They were all claimed almost immediately, but if you can't come, and I guess now you can't since there are no tickets, follow the Center for Politics YouTube channel where we'll be streaming live. Now, let me introduce the host for tonight's discussion. As most of you know, Paul Begala served as a senior strategist for President Bill Clinton's 1992 winning campaign, which, as those of you old enough to remember, he wasn't even favored to win the nomination. Nobody thought he could win the nomination. And then absolutely everybody knew he couldn't win the general. You know, George H.W. Bush had been at 89% after the Persian Gulf War. And funny thing happened, which is it's called politics. Politics happened, which it does regularly. And you don't expect many of the results, but they're there nonetheless. Paul is, what the heck are you, Paul? He was later counselor to President Bill Clinton in the White House, coordinating policy, politics, and communications. Today, he's a political contributor for CNN. He's a columnist for Newsweek. He's a professor of public policy. He's the author of 6 books on American politics, several of them New York Times bestsellers. He also continues to advise key political races across the country. And although he has taught at 3 other universities, his most important academic home and the one that is beloved to him is here, where he has served for years as a scholar with the Center for Politics. I don't know whether that's true or not, but I just worked it in here. He teaches a class titled Special Topics in American Politics, and I heard from the students it's a lot of fun and also educational. That's a good combination, keeps their attention. Paul is joined by, I think, the real star of this show because of his new book, by another returning special guest, Scott Jennings. Scott is a senior political contributor for CNN, and I've told him, I think once before, I hope they're giving you combat pay. Every time I see you on a panel there, you know, somebody's attacking you, and Scott, it's just wrong. All right, you can quote me on that. It's terrible, the way they treat you, but you always win the arguments. That's been my impression anyway. He's one of the nation's most recognized conservative commentators. See the balance? You know, that's for the Board of Visitors in case they're listening. He is not only that prominent commentator, and you're not going to believe this list of things that he does. I just asked him, you know, does he have a twin? The twin can run for Congress. He appears daily across the network's programs. That's why I see him so often. And more than a few of his comments go viral each week on social media. That can be good or bad. Scott is a native of Dawson Springs, Kentucky, and a veteran of numerous presidential, Senate, congressional campaigns. He's long been a political confidant of U.S. Senator Mitch McConnell, and he has served as special assistant to President George W. Bush after working on both of Bush 43's successful campaigns. He's also a regular columnist for the Daily Mail and a regular columnist for the LA Times and a graduate of the McConnell Center for Political Leadership at the University of Louisville, and he has taught at Harvard Kennedy School and Tufts University. He also hosts a daily national radio program, The Scott Jennings Show, and somehow he had time to write a book in between, A Revolution of Common Sense. And I'm looking forward to hearing about it. And I hope we do have copies here. None of you will be allowed to leave until you buy at least one. Now, if you buy multiple copies, because it's the holiday season, it's all one-stop shopping. See, potentially. Scott, did I do that well? One-stop shopping. If you buy multiple books, you can leave first. The others will be held back until you make your way out. In any event, I'm going to stop here before they come over here and grab the text. Please welcome Paul Begala and Scott Jennings.
Larry, thank you. And I particularly want to thank Larry and the center. Larry is an institution. Larry was here when the rotunda was a new build and has spent 5 decades, well, he's in his 6th now, on grounds teaching kids and inspiring them to get into politics. I'm proud to say I'm the father of one of them who has now entered into a career in politics. So what the center does is so important, Larry, and you are a treasured institution nationally and is particularly here at the university. So thank you. I want to thank the Blue Ridge Center for co-sponsoring this and the American Property Owners Alliance for co-sponsoring this. And thank you all for coming out here. Scott Jennings, you heard the introduction to him. Here's an admission against interest. He is my friend. And I say that, I just asked him, I paid for the book, I didn't take it for free, and I asked him to sign it, and I've already read a little of it, and I can tell you the first word is I, and every word after that I disagreed with. That's the point. But I want to get to it because it's an important book, but I want to start just biographically. Larry talked about Dawson Springs.
Yeah.
Hopkins County.
Yes.
I love your Commonwealth, you know that. I spent a year in Kentucky.
Yes, you did.
Steve Beshear, the father of the current governor, made me a Kentucky colonel. So you may call me colonel, but I love your Commonwealth, and I love the story of where you grew up. And I'd like you to tell everybody, what was Dawson Springs like? And tell me a little bit about your origin story.
Thank you. And before I do, I just want to say thanks to Larry, thanks to the university, thanks to all of you. It's an honor to be here. I've debated Larry on television a few times. It's not easy. I've debated Paul on television more than a few times. It's the hardest thing in the world. In fact, the first night I ever appeared on CNN, they threw me in the cage with Begala here, and I didn't think I was going to be back. But here we are 8.5 years later. But it's truly an honor to be here. I like to be on college campuses, and I really value public forums and public debate. So thank you all for having me. Yes, I grew up in Dawson Springs, Kentucky. It's in western Kentucky. It's a coal mining town, or was a coal mining town. I grew up on a street called Mine Equipment Road, on top of a coal mine, quite literally. My family wasn't miners. My father was a garbage man at times and a factory worker. My stepmother worked in a factory, and when she was laid off, cleaned houses and worked at a gas station overnight. My grandfather was a minor local elected official. He was a magistrate in Hopkins County's fiscal court, and they were all Democrats. I grew up in Dawson Springs in a town where everybody was a Democrat except about 8 people. I became the 9th when I registered to vote in 1996, which was the first election in which I voted. It's actually a great story. We have close primaries in Kentucky, and so I went down to vote in the 96 primary. And I get there, and the ladies knew me. Oh my gosh, Morton Jennings' grandson is here. So she's looking through the voter registry to find me. And she said, well, I see your grandfather and I see your father, but are you sure you registered? And I said, I did, but you're looking at the wrong list. She gets out the 1 page of Republican, looks at it over these glasses and looks at me and says, does your grandfather know what you've done? Of course, by the time I got back up to high school, my dad was already there. But fast forward, and now my dad actually was the first person to tell me that he thought Donald Trump was going to be the next president of the United States. And so the political evolution of people like my dad and people like from Dawson Springs, Kentucky, somewhat mirrors the changing coalitions of the parties today. But I graduated from Dawson Springs High School in 1996. I went to the University of Louisville only because I got a scholarship from the Mitch McConnell Center for Political Leadership at the University of Louisville. It's a nonpartisan program. He doesn't choose the students, but he funds the scholarships. And if it hadn't been for him, I doubt I would have gone to U of L. I don't know what would have happened to me, but certainly wouldn't have been able to go to a great university and go through an academic program like that. And, you know, at times I thought I was going to be a journalist. I was a radio journalist when I was in college. But then in 2000, as I was closing out my college career, politics came calling, and I've been in it ever since.
Well, I'm going to come back to politics, but this background in radio I think is so interesting. Scott was kind enough to come to my class today and host his show with my students in our seminar room. And it's a course on political communication, so you see a master communicator live in action. And you were telling the students, I hope you'll tell these folks, why did you start in radio? Why have you come back to it? In addition, I'm glad you're with CNN. But your media life, it began in radio and now you've returned to radio. Why?
I did start in radio. When I was in high school, I got a job at the local radio station, 2 stations actually, one in Madisonville, Kentucky, and one in Princeton, Kentucky. Dawson Springs wasn't big enough to have a radio station, so I had to travel a little. But working at these small stations, I immediately learned just how important local radio was to information distribution in these communities. And I loved it. From the first minute they let me turn on the microphone, I loved it. And I learned how to use the equipment. I learned how to run the board, as they say. I learned how to produce shows. I learned how to edit the tape. I learned everything I could learn about radio. I just thought it was a miracle that somebody like me could flip on a microphone and talk to a whole bunch of people out there about the news, about the weather, about the sports. Read the local obituaries. God help you if you mispronounce a name. So when I went off to college...
Well, the guy in the obituary doesn't care, right? He's got bigger problems. He's dead.
No, other people, Garrett.
Okay.
But I went off to college and I got to Louisville, bigger place, and I wanted to continue on and thought I should continue on in journalism. And I knew something about radio, so I went down to the big radio station in town and initially got a job in the promotions department as an intern, but I hated every minute of it. And I went down to the newsroom and I asked the news director for a chance to try out. And he handed me a newscast that he had just read live on the air. He said, well, come in this room and read it to me out loud. Let me see how you do. I read it and he hired me on the spot.
Wow.
And in addition to reading the news, I had 2 other jobs. I would be the board operator during the Rush Limbaugh show. Wow. And I would also be the person who would record Paul Harvey, news and comment. Anybody in here remember Paul Harvey? I recorded it and played it back every day at 11:45. So everything I know about radio, I learned from Paul Harvey and Rush Limbaugh. And so when I do it today,
right,
I'm thinking really of those 2 guys. That's kind of how I learned radio and what I think it really should sound like. I thought they were both brilliant at what they did. They did different things. But in my ear, that's what I'm shooting for every day. And I still believe in radio. And my show's on 220 radio stations around the country, and I still believe in radio and the power of it, the spoken word, to move people and to inform people. And if handled and done well and responsibly, it can be a very powerful thing.
Well, and it's a very intimate medium. You are in the car with them, or the truck, or the tractor, or the shower. Kind of creepy, but you know, it's a very intimate, and because you're in their head. And I know because I saw you do it. You first are really amazingly talented at it. You can tell, even though the Scott Jennings show was created in July, so you're only about 4 or 5 months into it. I could tell you've been doing this, and that this is your natural medium. What
I like about it is that, unlike television, there's really nothing to rely on except your own voice and your own writing. And I tell this to students a lot. Learning how to write for radio really is, I mean, when I was in college, the best writing education I got was not at Louisville. Apologies to the university. It was in the radio station, and being able to communicate things about the news and complicated issues in a very truncated amount of time. My old news director used to call it the economy of words. And so I learned at a young age how to write and how to communicate with as few words as possible. And that skill set really did carry over to everything else in my life, especially politics.
Well, we talked in class today, and I'd like you to share with them the changes you've seen, particularly in media. We'll get to politics in a minute, believe me. But social media, you know, Orson Welles called radio the theater of the mind. And I love that because you can just create it in your head. Social media, it seems to me, it's not intimate, and it's not taking place in your mind. It seems to me driven by hate and division and memes, and it's a completely different way to communicate. And I get the sense that it's a very lonely medium as opposed to this very intimate medium of radio.
I also think you don't necessarily know who you're talking to. With radio and whoever your favorite program is, I mean, when you're listening to play-by-play on sports, you sort of feel like you know the play-by-play guy. When you were listening to Rush, you felt like you knew Rush. Paul Harvey, it felt like you knew these people. And I think that's a key difference. The intimacy isn't there because you don't necessarily know all the time who you're speaking with and who is speaking to you. And so that can make it feel a little empty and superficial, in my opinion.
So how did you move from journalism and radio into politics? By the way, what did you study?
Political science and communications, and enjoyed both. I mean, I spent as little time in the classroom as possible. I hate to admit it, but I spent so much time working in journalism. I did enough to graduate, thank goodness. I moved into out of journalism and into politics because as I was coming to a close, it was the year 2000, and I got a phone call one day from Mitch McConnell, who said something very simple to me, which was, when are you going to get off the sidelines and get into the game?
That's pretty good.
And he was recruiting me to work for George W. Bush for president. And I had not really considered being a political operative at that point. I was interested in politics, and certainly I knew him because of the scholarship program. But the prospect of working on a presidential campaign, I could not resist. And so I left radio and journalism, I thought maybe for a brief period, and went to work on a presidential campaign, and it took me 25 years to get back to the radio station.
Wow. Let's talk about starting at the top.
Yeah.
You're in Kentucky. Your senator and the namesake of your scholarship asks you. But just to put it in context, this is a Commonwealth that had voted for Bill Clinton twice in large numbers the previous two elections. So we think Kentucky today, even though they have a Democratic governor, we think of it as a very Republican state. It was a Democratic state.
It was.
I think he had both senators and presidential candidate won. I know Clinton won. He won Hopkins County. He won Dawson Springs.
Sure he did, yeah.
How do you approach that then, coming at it from the minority in that Commonwealth in 2000?
Well, it was the first time I'd worked on a campaign, really, and so I guess I wasn't really thinking about the fact that it could go south. I'm an eternal optimist, and so I didn't consider that we might lose. And of course, in Kentucky, that was when we started to see the tide turn a little in Kentucky from a Democratic state, really into more of the red state that you know it today. It took a few more years than that, but that was some of the beginning. And really, by Labor Day, the state was well in hand, and I actually spent a fair amount of my fall in West Virginia, which was another long-time Democratic state. And of course, the Bush campaign placed a big bet that they could flip West Virginia, and of course, they did that too. And so I got a real education in running a presidential campaign for Republican and Democratic territory in two different places that cycle.
Well, tell me about that transition that you were a part of, moving those kinds of places. I mean, Virginia has 55 counties. Bill Clinton carried 44 of them. You know how many Barack carried? 0.
Yeah.
You know how many Joe carried? 0. You know how many Kamala carried? 0. Clinton ran better in West Virginia than he did in California. California had been Republican 9 out of the previous 10 presidentials by the time Bill Clinton rolls around. So lots of places have flipped, and California is a lot bigger. We get more electoral votes now, even though we've lost West Virginia, because California is bigger. But I'm really curious as to that Appalachian, blue-collar, working-class, core Democrat. I mean, Mike Dukakis carried West Virginia easily, comfortably. And now the Democrats can't get anywhere. Tell me about your approach to the places like your Commonwealth and West Virginia.
Yeah, some of it was cultural. Maybe a lot of it was cultural. I mean, less fighting about policy initially and a little more fighting about cultural matters. And of course, that really increased over time. You move from 2000 all the way up to, today. The dividing line between the two parties is extremely cultural, I think, in those kinds of places. Right. The commercials you guys ran for President Clinton in 92 and 96, you could slap a Make America Great Again logo on there and you wouldn't be able to tell the difference between Clinton or Trump TV ads when it comes to fighting for the working class, restricting illegal immigration, reforming welfare. I mean, the messages are the same because a lot of the constituents are the same for Trump as they were for, that kind of a campaign in the 90s. And so The way we approached it, and that was a little bit cultural. And Bush was an easy kind of Republican to sell from Texas, approachable. People felt like, he could relate to them at some level. And so he was a good campaigner. We had cultural issues emerging. And frankly, I think was just a better, more approachable candidate than Gore was, certainly, and certainly more than Kerry was in 2004.
That's fascinating. The motto, the credo of the Center for Politics is a good thing. Is it?
Oh, yes. I mean, this is how we solve all of our problems, isn't it? I mean, there's no other way to solve them. And, if you believe that politics is a good thing, then you inherently reject violence as the way we solve our problems, or you reject force, or you reject things, that inherently put people down or put people at a disadvantage. Politics is debate. Politics is speech. And that's how we do it in this country. We debate, we argue, sometimes it gets heated, and then we vote, and we do it all again 2 years later. And then we do it again, and then we do it again. And it's worked out pretty well for 250 years. And so I couldn't agree more with the motto, and I couldn't agree less with people who, look down on politics or think of it as somehow a bad thing. Politics is inherently a good thing because it supersedes all other ways for man to solve problems.
Right. I can take you to places where they don't have partisanship in politics. North Korea, Iran. There's lots of places that don't have our kind of vicious campaigns, and we've been involved in them on opposite sides.
And it's perfectly fine. And it's been.
It's a good thing. That's why I love that slogan.
And the founder of this university was no stranger to it, and that's fine. And it's perfectly fine. I do think, though, we're losing a little bit of our ability to debate each other.
Right. Why?
We find ourselves in these ideological bubbles, and technology makes it easy to sit in those bubbles and sit comfortably.
Right.
And it's easy to find information that confirms all your priors, and it's easy to screen out information that would challenge what you think. And in my job, and I'm sure you would agree with this, I often run into people in my debating job on CNN who are completely unaware of some of the information that I have encountered during the course of a day. And frankly, I'm unaware of some of the things they've encountered. And what I have come to worry about a little is that it's hard to have a shared national purpose when you don't have a shared reality. Now, that doesn't mean inherently what I'm seeing is wrong or incorrect or necessarily not factual. It just means I'm not seeing everything that Paul is seeing. You pull out your phone. If we all pulled out our phones in here and opened up any of our common social media apps, what I would see, what he would see, what you would see could be totally different. And so our realities are being shaped in ways that are so powerful by these algorithms. And I think it's easy to just forget that there may be other information out there. And so one of the reasons I do the job on CNN is because I believe it's important for Republicans to go into left-leaning spaces, and I believe it's important for Democrats to go into right-leaning spaces. The more we talk to each other, the more politics we'll have, and the better off we'll be.
I agree completely. One of my favorite political consultants, who used to be my bitter rival, is your former mentor, Karl Rove. And I always tease Rove, I do two things every day. I read the Holy Bible and I watch Rove on Fox News so I know what both sides are thinking. I believe in good and evil. And it's a joke, but it's important. We have to know. And I think you're right. I blame a lot of it on these devices.
It's interesting. We have more access to information than we've ever had. But at the same time, we have more walls up around us than we've ever had as a common people. And so until we learn how to defeat that and use these things for good and not evil, we're going to struggle with it. But right now, I think that the technology and the silos in which we find ourselves does create a barrier for debate. And when we lose the ability to debate each other, you start to default to other much, much worse things.
Right. Well, I think the big break came with social media and smartphones. The internet per se was a place we went to seek information. Right? How many touchdowns did Chandler Morris score against the hated Virginia Tech Hokies? Right? I would go on and type that in. How'd the UVA quarterback do against Tech? Now we go on and information finds us. And it's not at random. It is driven by an algorithm that keeps us addicted to that by firing our amygdala which is fired by, hate, division, confirmation bias, the most powerful drug in the world. Oh yeah, oh yeah, Jennings is terrible. Here's somebody saying that. Oh yeah, she must be right.
Yeah.
How do you fight against that?
I think the only way to fight against it is to be willing to pop it, break it. And the only way I have to do it right now is to go work in spaces where I'm not the majority opinion.
Right.
And, I don't have the ability to get on everybody's phone in here and reorient your algorithm. All I have the ability to do is go on CNN every night and offer up a viewpoint that's minority at the table, probably minority among our audience, but certainly speaks to half the country, maybe more than half, maybe sometimes 60 or 80 or 90% of the country. And that's a good thing. I mean, I regard what CNN is doing to resuscitate debate as one of the most important things happening in cable news today. You don't get much debate on the other channels.
Right.
You get very little debate. On CNN, they made a decision to go for debate. The 10 o'clock debating show is the only show like it on TV. It's not perfect. We don't always get it right in terms of cast or topics, but a lot of the time we do. We put it on the air during the election thinking this would be a temporary experiment. And everybody loved it so much, it has stayed on the air. It's one of our best shows. I go all over the country. I hear two things. I love you and I love the debates. I hate you and I love the debates. The commonality is the debates. Americans inherently want debates. And it shocks me there actually isn't more unscripted debating content being offered to the American people. I think you could probably do no end of it and it would work.
I think part of the problem is we've moved from a politics of I'm right, you're wrong, to I'm good, you're evil. Because I may be incorrect when you say we should have a tax rate at X and I think it should be 2X. Okay, that's a matter of opinion and we can split the difference, we can compromise. But if I begin from a premise that you are evil,
yeah,
I must not compromise, or then I'm participating in evil.
I think I'll say when you turn politics or other political views, when they become replacements for religion,
it's interesting.
It's easy to view the world that way. And
or conflated with your religion.
Yes, and it's easy to then start to view things as good and evil or moral or immoral. Now, I would also say this, I think what you're describing is real, and I think it's also morphing into a corrosive illiberalism, and it infects some people in both ends of the political spectrum. The idea that we're past debating. We need to banish people with a different viewpoint from the public square. I think it's one of the most corrosive things we have going on, this infection of illiberalism. And it doesn't mean every political party has to absorb every person who comes along claiming to be in that persuasion and all their ideas, but debate, free speech, platforming of speech, it's okay. And what's not okay is to say the time for debates is past and the time to restrict speech or the time to try to banish our opponents from the public square has come. I fundamentally reject that. I don't believe in that. I mean, it doesn't mean I have to believe everything he says or agree with all of his opinions or the opinions of a lot of the people I encounter. But when you start to get that impulse that maybe he shouldn't be allowed to engage in the debate, I think that's when we're headed down a very, very dangerous road that leads to things other than politics to solve our problems.
Well, to me, the mistake is conflating the person with the views. I do come at this from a religious point of view. And one of the tenets of my religion, Nancy Pelosi, my fellow Catholic, says this all the time, love the sinner, hate the sin. Right? So I'm not allowed by my faith to say I hate Donald Trump. I wish I could. Can't stand him. But I can say I hate what Trump's doing. That's a huge difference, though. It's a huge difference. I can say I disagree with everything in Jennings' book. We should read it, particularly if on my side of the aisle. Because to me, that's a really important distinction. Because then we're talking about ideas, not identity.
Yeah. Well, I assume you, like me, separate your faith from your religion. I mean, your religion from your politics, your faith from your politics. And by that, I mean, you believe that we answer to a higher power than some bureaucrat or some politician. We answer to God. And our rights come from God. Our freedom comes from God. And when you believe that, it used to be not terribly controversial, but now it is. But when you believe that, then it's easy to keep those things separate. I understand where my rights come from, and I understand what my responsibilities are to my nation and my community as it relates to political engagement, but I'm able to separate the two. My point is, I think some people have decided to replace religion and the way you treat religion with certain political views, and they put that above faith. They put that above a belief that our rights come from God. And so I think when you do that, it can lead people down pretty dark roads.
I think that's fascinating because I know you're being polite, but you're looking at the liberals saying that. I'm looking at conservatives conflating Mr. Trump with God Almighty or with his son. There's a little church in rural Virginia. I live out in the Shenandoah Valley. And there's a little church I drove by during the election season of 2024. And this pastor, I don't know who he or she was, but they put up a sign that said, "Worship Jesus Christ, not any politician." That's in a county 71% Trump. And I think that pastor was telling their flock, be real careful about deifying any politician. I honestly think there are far too many Americans who look at Trump and either see the devil or, in the case of perhaps this congregation, they see the Savior. And it's not. He's just a politician.
I think it's fine to look at politicians as guardians of values. I mean, I remember being asked in the president's first term, why do evangelical Christians love Donald Trump so much? He's not authentically one of them. And I used to say, no, we didn't hire him to sing soprano in the choir. We hired him to guard the church house doors. And I still think that today, actually. I think it's possible to believe
He's sending ICE agents into the church house door.
Oh, come on. I think it's possible to believe that politicians can guard your values, whatever they happen to be. But I wouldn't advise putting them above your values or above, your faith. I agree with the sign. I wouldn't deify any politician.
Right.
Because they're all human and nobody's perfect except one.
Let's talk about politics. Today, this is day 1,147 of the Trump presidency. So I committed research, took a look at where his predecessors were at this day. Ronald Reagan was at 54, it was a different time. H.W. Bush was at 41. Bill Clinton was at 53. George W. Bush was at 49. Barack Obama was at 45. Joe Biden was at 40. Donald Trump, in his first term on this day, day 1147, was at 46. Today, he's at 36. Why?
Well, wait, you're saying George W. Bush was at 49% at this point in his second term?
His first term.
Oh, first term, yes. Yes, first term, fine. Second term, by this time, I was there.
He was down.
We were not at 49,
He was
I can
down.
assure you.
Right.
It wasn't exactly the salad days there in the political affairs office in the second term. We were heading into
So I may be being unfair because this is functionally maybe a second term. I looked at first term.
Yeah, I view it as a second.
That's a fair point.
But look, the point is his numbers are down a little. Trump's been interesting because he has existed in a plane of job approval that never really gets too high or too low. He has a sort of a bit of a ceiling and a bit of a floor.
Right.
And it undulates a little, but it's existed in this sort of narrow band. And the bottom never truly falls out of him because of his base. That wasn't true of Bush. I mean, the bottom fell out for us in the second term at one point, getting down to around 30%, very low. And so that won't happen to Trump, I don't think. But I think that the general issue is not dissimilar to what every president faces, and that is if you don't believe your economic circumstances are improving, you're mad at whoever's in charge. That's been true for every Republican and every Democrat for time immemorial.
Right.
And although I don't think Donald Trump created or had much of anything to do with the cost of living crisis in this country, he's now in charge and he's been voted in to fix it and solve it. And people want to feel like the trajectory is getting better. He would argue that it is. Gas is below $2 a gallon in some places. National average is below $3 a gallon for the first time in 5 years. So there's some bright green shoots. But overall, people feel like it's just very expensive to live in America right now. And I'm not sure he has to totally solve it all by the midterm, but it's the trajectory that matters. Do people believe you're on the upswing as it relates to solving it? I think people inherently believe he inherited a mess. That's why he was voted in. And so when you get to the bottom of a hole, are you coming out or are you still digging? And that is the question he'll have to personally answer for the party in the midterm.
I've been astonished, though, that the guy who beat Kamala Harris because she and Joe Biden, I think, did not articulate the pain we were in. They kept telling you things didn't hurt as much as you thought. So like if you bust up your shoulder and you go to the doc and the doc says, oh, it doesn't hurt. You're like, you're getting another doctor. You're like, I'm telling you it hurts. You know it hurts. And I watched President Biden and Vice President Harris, I think, seem to lose touch with the pain people were feeling. I'm watching Trump doing the exact same thing as Biden. He would flip out. He doesn't like me anyway, but he'd flip out if he heard that. But it seems to me he's making the self-same mistake. He's lecturing us in different language. Biden would say, we have the lowest inflation of any OECD nation. Oh, good. They take that to Sheetz and get a gallon of gas. But Trump is, I think, in his Trumpy way, doing the same thing, telling us this is the golden age of America.
I think it is natural for any president to argue that their policies are making things better, whether that's economically, foreign policy, whatever. They're always going to argue, I've made good decisions, here are the reasons. I actually think when Trump is at his best, and this is why he got more votes every time he ran, is because he's good at drawing lines between himself and his opponents and drawing contrasts, and he's good at counterpunching. He's not as good at explaining in a vacuum, but he is really good at drawing contrasts and drawing lines. And so I think he's the best salesman in the party. And I think the challenge for him in this cycle is not going to just be to explain my policies are making it better for these reasons. It's going to be to say, here are my policies and here are theirs and here's why mine are better than theirs and there's really no way you could argue this with me. It'll be a line drawing rather than arguing it in a vacuum. And I actually think this is where Biden came up a little short and Harris came up short. They never really, I don't think, contrasted themselves because they were so fixated on being right.
Interesting.
From a public argument perspective, but they never really pivoted off of their opposition. And I think in a political campaign, which we're about to embark upon one, the choice is, am I better than the other guy on the ballot? Is my party better than your party as it relates to the choice we have to make today? And that is where if I were advising him, I would say, we're going to have to start drawing lines between us and them. You did it successfully in 2024. You're going to have to rekindle that sort of innate talent that you have.
So for this book, you interviewed President Trump, you interviewed his top aides. I'd give anything to be able to do that because you worked in the White House, I worked in the White House, and I get the sense from your book, but also from talking to people who worked for President Trump, it's a really different place than like what I'm used to. The Clinton White House was thought to be a little chaotic because he liked long policy arguments. He loved debate. And George W. Bush ran a very tight ship. You had to use the fine bone china. You couldn't walk into his Oval Office with that cup, Scott. I mean, he was very formal, very disciplined. Everything ran on time. Trump's the same way, right?
No, it's somewhat different. I didn't.
What's it like in there?
I didn't really know him at all. He had dominated all of my conversations in media for 10 years, but I didn't really know him until February. I listened to his inaugural address on the set at CNN. I heard him use the phrase "a revolution of common sense," and I thought to myself that day, this would make an amazing title for a book. Someone should write it. And so I sort of went round and round about how to do it and talked to some book people about it. And finally, I just decided to go over to the Oval Office in early February and pitch it because I thought, well, I could write this book, but it would be better if he would cooperate and I could get some access to him. So I went to the Oval Office, and at that time in early February, he hadn't started the redecorating in earnest yet. He had just put up the portrait of Reagan, which is still in there.
Right.
But it's still somewhat.
And you say he talks to you about the different portraits.
He does.
And
yeah.
why Monroe is there, why FDR is there. Do you mind if you
Sure.
take people into that meeting?
Sure. Well, I go into the meeting, and again, I don't know him, but he knows me from television, and he looks up from the desk, and I thought I was meeting with him alone. The whole cabinet is in there, and he was conducting like 6 meetings at the same time. I mean, it was quite something. But he says, "You look terrific." I mean, you look good on TV, but you actually look terrific. Have a seat next to the other Scott. Besant, the Treasury Secretary, who will henceforth be the other Scott in my household. And so I'm sitting there, and he's like, "Does everybody here know Scott? He's like our best guy. He knows how to defend me without getting fired, which is no small thing." And so we have a little banter. And then he says, "To be honest, he used to be a little bit average, But then I came along and now he's terrific. So this is him like reacting to me, the television person. So I sit there for a couple of hours and I listen to
Hours?
a couple of hours. He's talking to these two guys about tariffs on steel and aluminum. He's talking to Rubio about Panama Canal. He's talking to another person about having been to the Super Bowl the night before. Did you hear how much they booed Taylor Swift at the Super Bowl?
They booed Taylor Swift?
Yes, and he said they booed her. And you remember?
And I want a case of what he's drinking.
And they cheered me. And so anyway, all these things are going on, and I'm like, I have no idea who was running the country the last 4 years, but I know who's running it now. and it was just fascinating to watch him conduct this. I mean, they call it the we, but it's like an orchestra of conversations, and he is listening to them all, keeping up with them. I mean, it's really fascinating. And finally, at the end of it, he calls me up and we have a quick banter about the book. And I just said, look, I think, you revolutionize campaigning. You're going to revolutionize governing. By this time, he'd already signed hundreds of executive orders and so on. I said, I think 100 people are going to come along. All the usual suspects are going to write a book crapping on you. And somebody who likes you and wants you to succeed should write a book about how we see it. And he said, well, how do you know it's going to go well? I said, I think it's going to go well. I think it's going to be fine. And so he agreed. And so hence, that was the first time he asked me, he said, you don't write, you're not a writer, you're a TV person. And I said, well, I've written thousands of newspaper columns, but this would be my first book. And so, that's where we got started. And I spent time with him. I interviewed a good chunk of the cabinet, a lot of the senior staff. I went with him to Michigan on his 100th day in office. And in that speech, he said, whether you're right or whether you're left or whatever you are, it's just common sense. And that is how he sums up his political branding of the current Republican Party. I asked him later in a radio interview that I had him on my show, do you consider yourself to be more of a conservative or more of a common sense person? And he said, well, most of the time, conservative is common sense. Left himself a little wiggle room, on it. But I really do believe that part of the political genius of Trump is this idea of removing old political labels from things and applying sort of new branding that was attractive to people who didn't think of themselves as being Republicans or conservatives or even political at all, and certainly appealing to people who had no demonstrable history of voting in our elections at all. And that's what he did in 2024. He brought a bunch of new people in, he changed the composition of the electorate, and that's how he got reelected. And I think a lot of it was on the power of this idea that he wasn't there to be a standard issue political operator. He was there to do what was the common sense thing. And I think that's what people bought into.
So what happens next post-Trump? When I was a kid, when you were coming up, President Reagan, probably more than anybody, defined the Republican Party. I think it's so noteworthy that he pointed out to you that he's got President Reagan in his Oval Office.
He told me, he said he had just put that painting up, and he quickly mentioned, Reagan, terrible on trade.
But he said, but the Republicans love it, as if he were a little removed from the Republicans, right?
Yeah, he did. And then he pointed out that he also had FDR up.
Right.
Which I think he somewhat reveres because of the exercise of executive power.
Right.
And I think he's had the most maybe powerful or active presidency since FDR, from just exercising executive branch, stretching the limits, the lines. I think you could argue it's the most consequential from the exercise of executive power since FDR. I think he would argue that. He asked me who I would put over the fireplace, incidentally.
Right.
And I said, well, you're asking a Kentuckian how to put Abraham Lincoln. And he said, well, I've got Lincoln over here, Honest Abe. And he does. And right now he has a bust of Abraham Lincoln sitting next to the Resolute desk. So when I was in the Oval a few nights ago to deliver a copy of the book to him, I was proud to see that there as a Kentuckian.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
You talk a lot, and it's probably a real thing. I need to be open to it. It's one of the things I don't agree with, so I need to hear. This notion of Trump derangement syndrome on the left, right? And I mean, I can't stand that guy. I don't like the sight of him. I don't like his voice. I don't like anything. And I certainly don't like what he's doing to my country. But I will tell you, let's play this game. I thought Warp Speed was great. It was wonderful. It was all Donald Trump. It was classic. It brought us the best, safest, fastest, most effective vaccine. But by the way, it was a very liberal approach. You throw money at the problem. That's how you solve everything. That's how we won World War II.
We threw money at it, but removed bureaucracy.
Right, fine. I'm all for that. Throw money at the problem. So he did Warp Speed, which even I, as a strong Trump disliker, as I told you, my faith doesn't allow me to say I hate him. By the way, he negotiated the USMCA, an updated NAFTA, which was started by Reagan and then Bush, and then Clinton finished it off. But it was out of date. He updated it. It was such a bipartisan thing that Nancy Pelosi supported it. Mm-hmm. These are two things he did that were great. Can you name me two that either two that sucked or two that Biden did that were great?
Two that Biden did?
Sure. Wow. Believe me, I dislike Trump a lot more than you'll ever dislike Joe Biden.
I don't know.
And I found two, but I took time. It took like 3 days for me to think of this.
Yeah, I'd have to think about Biden.
But he stumbled. Think about things maybe that Mr. Trump has done that you thought were mistaken. Trump? Or you just disagree with. Like Biden waived student loan repayment. I hated it. I went on CNN, went on Bill Maher, screamed and yelled about it. And I love Joe Biden. I love him. And I thought he was a great president. But everybody does stuff you disagree with.
Well, I'll give you a recent one. I talked about this on the Abby debating show one night. The day that it was revealed that he was still in litigation with the Department of Justice over.
Right.
He had, as a private citizen, sued, as any of you could do if you had been prosecuted, sued the DOJ for what he believed is wrongful prosecution. I think it was an eye-watering sum of money, like $230 million or something. And that day it had come out that this was still active, and he had been asked about it in the Oval Office, and he said, well, it's up to them, it's not up to me. And and he even acknowledged in his comments that day, it's an unusual situation, and I couldn't agree more. And my advice is this needs to be tabled while he is the sitting president. Now, when he's out of office, if a future administration, when he's a private citizen, wants to take it up, that would be up to them. But while he is sitting in the office, I don't think it's right to pursue that. So that's one recent issue where...
So when you do something like that, do you hear from him? And if you don't want to reveal that, that's okay. Like, does he call you and gripe you out? Or some of his many staffers?
Oh, I hear from lots of people about lots of things. And, what I try to do on issues is, before I talk about them on TV, I try to get as learned about them as I can. Often what I read, I don't take that as all that there is to know. So I try to read a variety of things. I try to listen to a variety of things, and then if I have the time, and most of the time I do, I will pick up the phone and call people who are involved in these things and say, what's your perspective? And so I try to be as informed as I can be. In this particular case, I felt pretty informed about it. And, it's a case where I think he's actually perfectly in his rights as a citizen at the time he filed the suit to go for it. Don't know how it would turn out, but he was perfectly able to do it and probably had a point. But when he got elected president, it changed things. And so that was if he were standing here, I'd give him the same advice.
Right.
Which is to say, there's no harm in tabling this until you're out of office. And it would look better and feel better to the American people if this was adjudicated when you weren't sitting at the top of the executive branch.
Right. I want to open up to questions, but sort of close on a very self-serving commercial for what we do. You may not know this at home, but a lot of times if Scott is saying something, it's because he did just hear from the Treasury Secretary or the President of the United States or someone very close to them. And we're not reporters. And reporters are absolutely indispensable. But sometimes commentators who have been there, they'll open up to us more. So if I'm on and I say, Schumer's likely to blah, 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 the chances that I heard that from Schumer are very high.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not going to say that to the audience because I want to maintain my relationships, because I'm not a journalist. I'm not obligated to reveal my sources. I guess they're not either. But you bring a perspective to this. Again, we disagree about everything in public policy. But when you're speaking, I know that it's a highly informed. A lot of people think that we're just hacks, that we just come on and spout the party line. And we believe what we believe, and I actually think that's an admirable thing. But I know in my case, and I know in yours, when you're saying it, it's because you have got access to information and people that, frankly, our journalists don't, because they're not going to open up to a journalist the same way they will to you or to me.
And I think that's why what we do and how CNN uses us is extremely valuable. If this job done properly
right.
can be the most informative and educational thing for our viewers. If you have commentators who are in the know, able to talk to people, get people on the phone, and not just take in their information, but assess it and analyze it and explain why something is happening or what is about to happen. You know, when I do these shows, to me, what's the goal? The goal is to make the viewer more informed.
Right.
Like we're trying to give you the most educational experience you can, and I think in our case, the most entertaining experience you can get from politics. I don't know why politics has to be boring. I did this podcast the other day, and she was like, well, you know, do you think it's good for, you know, you to be so theatrical or so, you know, colorful in this comment? Well, does this have to be boring? Can we not talk about these things and, you know, have a little bit of, you know, entertainment or color with it and turn a phrase and be human beings with each other? Of course it's a good thing. It draws more people in. If more people are interested in a political conversation, isn't that a good thing?
Right.
It doesn't all have to be boring.
Why did throngs of people show up to the Lincoln-Douglas debates?
Yeah, it was entertaining.
Because they were theatrical.
Yeah, and they couldn't watch, you know, Virginia in the ACC championship. So
With that, let me
to
throw
the
it o-
debates.
Let me throw it open to questions. By the way, yeah, please do me a favor and win in Charlotte on Saturday night. As the father of a Who and a fan myself, I'm all in for UVA. Questions for our author?
Yes, sir.
Oh, we've got mics coming.
Oh,
too.
Mike, right here.
I thought it was interesting your comment about branding and Trump's ability to do that, or any politicians. And it seemed what was pivotal to him being elected in terms of drawing bipartisan support was the whole Maha movement
Yes.
and getting Bobby Kennedy on board. Can you elucidate us on that?
Yeah, absolutely. The Maha movement. You know, one person I've gotten to know very well in the last few months is a fitness influencer named Jillian Michaels. I assume you know who Jillian is, famous person. Would describe herself of being from the left, but she was part of this Maha movement. And she, I think, is one of countless hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people in this country who, for them, this idea that we're unhealthy and we don't have to be and different policy choices could change that was really driving her interest in politics. And she and others latched onto a campaign that said, I'm going to make this a top priority. I'm going to bring people in who will listen to you, who believe in you, who do think we should focus on it. It's old school coalition building politics. Trump added people to his coalition that he didn't have. And they were really non-traditional. I'm sure many of them don't think of themselves as either political at all or certainly not Republicans. And yet here they were. And he made a bet that bringing in RFK was going to attract the people that believed in him. And I think in large measure that worked out. It's hard to quantify it exactly, but I don't think they went backwards when they did it. And so one of the talents of Trump has been to recognize opportunities to build out his coalition. It's interesting. There's a lot of people in politics that are constantly trying to make their party smaller. Like, I want to excommunicate you. I want to excommunicate you. I want to get rid of you. Trump actually is like, no, we need to, I'm going to add these people. No, I'm going to add this guy. I'm going to add this guy. And so the Maha group is one of the biggest examples of that. Now, his coalition, because of this talent, is ideologically diverse. I mean, we're in the same political party. We got Donald Trump, Rand Paul, RFK, Mitch McConnell, God rest his soul, Hulk Hogan. You know, I mean, it's an ideologically diverse political party. But that's how you win. George W. Bush did the same thing. That's how we won the national popular vote in 2004. We added people in who weren't traditionally conservative. That's how Bill Clinton added people. And two-term presidents tend to know how to build coalitions. Trump is no different. And that's why they're hard to replace or replicate. You know, who replaced Obama? Who replaced Clinton? You know, it doesn't happen very often that you can replicate or replace these folks. It'll be hard to replace or replicate Trump because of that talent to build a coalition around himself. You can try to carry it forward and put your own spin on it, but to replicate him would be difficult. But I think the Maha movement was a critical piece of his coalition building, and it still is today. I mean, you know, he not only did he bring Kennedy into his campaign, he put him in his cabinet. And you can hate it or love it, But you can't deny that, Trump is sort of responsive to coalition politics. He brings in a lot of union voters. Now, the Republican Party platform is a lot different and more geared towards that class of voter than it would have been under a different kind of a Republican. So he brings people in, and then he actually governs towards them. And people say, well, it's not conservative, and Kennedy's a Democrat, and this and that. But to Trump, he built out this coalition, and he made them promises. Chiefly, I'll listen to you. And he won the national popular vote because of it. First time we'd done it in 20 years.
Question over here.
Hello. Scott and Paul, thank you guys both so much for speaking with us. I actually spoke to both of you very briefly years ago on a Zoom from Jennifer Lawless's class. So it's great, seeing you guys in the flesh. Two questions. The first one's a little bit old news for Scott, and then the second one's a little bit newer that I'd love to hear both of your perspectives on. So firstly, do you believe that the 2020 election was legitimate or illegitimate, sort of the results? So a quick yes or no, just curious to hear what you have to say on that. And then secondly, Scott, you mentioned that there's sort of a concern about illiberalism. Do you find that any of the actions that Trump is engaging in right now is a concern towards eroding that liberalism? And I'd love to hear both of your perspectives on that. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, no, I think Joe Biden won the 2020 election. On the illiberalism, no, my point is, broadly, I think there are people on both ends of the ideological spectrum that would love to banish their political opposition from the debating square, and I don't agree with that. I believe in debates, and I have a lot of confidence in our ideas as Republicans and as conservatives, and I don't really fear debates. I certainly don't fear them enough to banish my debating opponents. To me, when you're trying to banish your opponents from debates, it's a fundamental lack of confidence in what you're doing. And so, no, I don't. I actually think, Trump has been one of the greatest engagers of, backs and forths with Democrats and press and recent memory. And so, no, I don't really have any fears about him, but I think there are actors on both ends of the spectrum that are somewhat illiberal. And I just, I tend to think we solve our problems with debates and elections, and you can't really have elections without the debating part. And so I'll always be an adherent to that.
Yeah, Scott and I talked about this on a show today, and I think, I could be wrong, but I think it kind of started on the left, the cancel culture. We don't want to hear from you because you're evil. And people came to campuses, and because they were conservative, they were shouted down, or I think that's terrible. It is classically illiberal, right? I mean, what did Mr. Jefferson say? I have sworn upon the altar of God eternal hostility over all forms of control over all forms of tyranny over the mind of man. In other words, nobody tells you what to think. I have to say, it has really moved to the right, though. I think the left has quit doing that because, who knows why, but I think they have. It's way down. But on the right, it's not just screaming out in the halls so that the politician can't speak. It is the coercive power of the federal government, the most powerful force on earth, going after a comedian, going after law firms, going after this university and others. Donald Trump is the greatest threat to free speech since the Alien and Sedition Acts passed by John Adams to screw Thomas Jefferson 2 centuries ago. That's what I think.
Well, thank you guys for coming out. It's a pleasure to have you here at UVA. I had a question for Mr. Jennings specifically. Recently, anecdotally at least, there's been a large growth of conservative ideas, especially among young men. So at the end of the Trump era, at the end of this term, where do you see the future of the Republican Party and conservative ideas as a whole in America?
Well, look, I think whoever the next nominee of the party is has a responsibility to do his best or her best to keep as many eggs in the basket as you can. No one can replicate Trump. And you also can't replicate the circumstances in which previous campaigns occurred. I think one thing, when we analyze campaigns, we often analyze them from the perspective of how smart or how stupid that particular person was. But lost in that conversation is what circumstances were they dealing with?
Very smart.
the circumstances in 2028 and the cultural conditions of 2028, the economic conditions of 2028 will probably be somewhat different than 2024 or 2020 or 2016. And so it's the responsibility of that campaign to adjust to those conditions in the moment. And the good campaigns do adjust. It's not that you have to give up on or change all of your beliefs or views, but you have to understand where what kind of a conversation is going on among the American people. So as it relates to young men, I think Donald Trump didn't start this, but certainly the two parties diverged many, many years ago as it related to how they were viewing the role of men in the world. And a lot of young men got the idea that most Democrats hated them and didn't have much use for them and thought they were the root of most of the evil. So they decided to look for a different political home, and they found it. We'll see if Democrats want to keep going down that road in future elections. I wouldn't advise it. My advice would be don't excommunicate anybody. Try to attract everybody. But certainly Trump took advantage of that, what I think was a fundamental weakness in his opponents, to portray nearly half the country as, somehow inherently problematic because of their gender. Again, will we be having this conversation in 2028? We'll have to see. But if we are, it'll inure to the Republicans' benefit once more. I don't know if we will be or not, but to me, this, among other cultural issues, the best Trump they ever had on SNL was a guy named Darrell Hammond. They were so dumb when they got rid of Darrell. But he said something once about Trump that I think was the best analysis of Trump. He said he was a genius empath. He said this, I think it was the Washington Post. And his ability to sense and absorb and reflect the emotional state of a crowd, of the electorate, of a constituency is unmatched. And part of that conversation that you brought up about how young men were viewing the two political parties is wrapped up in Trump's ability to recognize that and use it. It's not the only issue on which he did that, but it was one of the major issues on which he did that. And the divergence in votes in 2024, men in particular, is pretty stark, and you can see how it paid off for him.
Hi. Thanks. I agree in debate just as much as you do, but my concern is they've turned out violent. We all know what happened to Charlie Kirk, and I think that's really been trouble. And also, how do you feel about this censorship coming out of CNN for so many years? Whether it's vaccine deniers or whatever.
I'll say a word about Charlie, who I had seen just a few days before he was murdered. He and I did an event, a Turning Point event in Colorado. We had a conversation, and a lot of it was about the future of Western civilization and, the idea that we weren't just debating about politics as usual, that there was something larger going on. But he fundamentally believed in debate, and he was murdered for engaging in debate. And I think the person who murdered him and the people who cheered on that murder after it happened thought and hoped that it would scare the rest of us into shutting up, that it would scare us all into believing that debates were inherently dangerous and that we should stop having them. And I think the opposite happened. I think a lot of people, young people especially, decided this was the moment not to be scared, but to rise up. And so I think in silencing one voice, they created thousands. I think in ending one conversation, they created millions.
Who is they?
They? Well,
so far as law enforcement, that murderer,
the shooter, and B, the thousands upon thousands of people who cheered on the execution of Charlie after it happened. And you cannot deny that there were many, 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 many people who couldn't contain their glee. You had Democrats who couldn't even bring themselves on the floor of the House to vote for a resolution regarding this. And I thought it was awful. And so I think in this case, somebody's willingness to debate led to their death. But I think it may have also created thousands of more Charlies, truthfully. And, that's the greatness of America. We're just not really all that willing to be scared. And yeah. But your other question about CNN is, I can only speak to my experience at CNN, and I'll just tell you this. Nobody has ever told me what to say. Nobody has ever told me not to espouse a certain view. Nobody's ever put a script in front of me. Nobody has ever said afterwards, you shouldn't really take that position. I've certainly been disagreed with strongly, and I've certainly had people, go on television and, lose their minds at something I just said. But I can tell you, I have never been censored, and I have never been told you're not allowed to have that viewpoint, or at least you're not allowed to espouse it. All I've ever been told is, give us your authentic opinion based on your values and your experience and your knowledge. That's what I do. I think that's the same mandate that Paul has. Mm-hmm. And I don't know what your experience has been, but I have never, ever been censored. Now, that's not to say that most people there would agree with most of my opinions. They certainly don't. But they've certainly given me a platform, and they've never restricted it or attempted to personally coerce me into a different position. So.
Thank you again to both of you for being here tonight. In the spirit of discussing your views on debate, Mr. Jennings, I'm interested to see what you think about the role of social media companies in particular in kind of the echo chambers that you were discussing, and whether the government should continue down the path of allowing them to promote or suppress whatever speech they like in the interest of the free speech of an algorithm, or whether we should be more intensely regulating those companies to allow equal platforms for debate.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating question, because at the same time I have concerns about, our lack of a shared national reality, I also would have extreme concerns about the government placing restrictions upon speech. Makes me really nervous when we start to try to shape the contours of free speech. And so you'd have to be really careful, and that would probably lead you ultimately to decide we just can't do this. And so I don't know ultimately what the answer to your question is. In some ways, social media has allowed more people to engage in more speech and probably be engaged in more conversations than they otherwise would have. At the same time, it's probably also, fed them into silos and bubbles that they can't get out of. And so we've probably seen some good effects and some negative effects. I generally have just always erred on the side of more speech. I do think the companies have some responsibilities to assess on a rolling basis whether what they're doing is helping or hurting American culture. It's good business to be helpful. And I actually do think there have been attempts by the companies to do that. I don't think they have all the answers right now either. And certainly a lot of their efforts, I think, have been focused on protecting children from things they shouldn't be seeing. And I think there's strides being made on that as well. But as it relates to speech, over in Europe right now, they'll throw you in jail. You put the wrong thing on Facebook. And I don't think we want to get to a place like that in America. So I'm sort of if we can't find the right answer, it's never the wrong answer to say, well, we're just going to err on the side of more speech. That's my view. Paul, I don't know.
Right. I'm a First Amendment absolutist. Now, that still means there are, I can't leak the nuclear secrets if I'm in the Army, right? There's still some limits, but very, very few. And I don't want any more. I think Scott's right. And I certainly don't want the government to decide. They used to have this thing, the fairness doctrine, because they believed the airwaves were scarce. And so if you're saying something liberal, you got to have a conservative on. Reagan threw that out, and the liberals hated it. I thought it was great to throw it out because I'm for freedom. And AM radio turned into a completely conservative medium. So what? Right? I don't want the government to say, they used to. Jennings is on, so you got to give him a gala an hour. I don't want that, and I don't want that with social media. Here's, though, what I'm very interested in. I think I have a much more negative view about social media's effect on our democracy than Scott. I was at CNN about 2 weeks ago, and one of the great things about working there is the green room conversations. Because people come in. I was in there one day, and Lech Walesa walked in, one of the great heroes of the Cold War. Like, holy smokes. So I'm just hanging out, waiting to go on whatever show I was on that night, and I strike up a conversation with this guy. And I'm ashamed to say I had no idea who it was. I'm John. Okay, John, nice to meet you. Where are you from? Provo. Oh, I love Provo. Spent a lot of time in Utah, love Utah. We blah, 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 how great Utah is. Turns out he's John Curtis, the senator from Utah. And I do this for a living, and I didn't know that. I was ashamed of myself. I caught on late, and he's
new. It's okay.
He's new, but he's unbelievably kind to a knucklehead like me. And most senators are there because they want to have their ring kissed, right? So anyway, so I'm impressed already with what a dope I am, but also how kind he was. And I said, what are you here to talk about? He said, I've got a new bill, co-sponsored with Mark Kelly, a Democrat, Curtis, a Republican. He said, I'm going to make social media companies responsible for defamation. Here's the deal. Bill Clinton signed this law in when I worked for him. The Communications Decency Act, which did a lot of very good things, but there's Section 230. It's only about 28 words. And the Silicon Valley robber barons will tell you it's created more of wealth than any sentence in American history. They are right. It's also done more damage to our public discourse than any sentence in history. It says, effectively, social media companies are not publishers. So they can't be liable for something some idiot posts. They're neutral. Here's my problem with that. It's probably true when we did it, because we thought there was no social media. We thought about the internet as like the bulletin board at the Y. And so you put a 3x5 card up there and say, Jennings shot a man in Reno just to watch him die. You shouldn't be able to sue the Y. Well, sue me. So that was the idea behind it. Good idea. 29 years later, terrible effect, because what it means is if Scott and I go on CNN, if I go on CNN and I say Jennings shot a man in Reno just to watch him die, he can sue me, which is fine. He can get my beat up car, but he can sue CNN, which is $1 billion corporation. So CNN is responsible for what it publishes because it makes money off of that. And to me, it's a very effective market-based way. I don't want to restrict anybody's speech, but if you defame someone or similar sorts of things. So this all Senator Curtis, I think, I haven't read the bill. I exchanged emails with him, and I really want to learn more about it. But I think some approach that takes these firms that are publishers now, they are publishers in the same way. In fact, they're much wealthier publishers than CNN or the Cavalier Daily or any publisher. And his idea, I think, I hate to speak for him because I may be getting his bill wrong, but this is how I understood it from this conversation. Just make them responsible in the same way that every other multi-billion-dollar publisher is. It doesn't restrict my ability to post that Jennings shot a man in Reno just to watch him die, but it means that the people who make money off of that post are going to be liable for it. And that has some promise to me. I don't want to restrict anybody's free speech, but we have had defamation laws in this country since the first day we existed. And I think there's a way to do that consistently.
I'll just add one other thing that I think would actually help a lot. Identifying where you are. And X just started doing
They did. That was a good idea. Yeah.
I think there are a lot of foreign actors
Right.
who use these platforms to mislead and try to divide us against ourselves. And they do so under the belief that we won't ever really find out where they are or who they're working for. The X platform just started publishing where you are. Pretty good idea.
That's a good point.
And so you start to see some of the more divisive or crazy things, and you can see they're emanating from outside the United States, often in places that aren't terribly friendly to the United States. To me, that is a model for some of these social platforms. If we're trying to think about, if we accept Paul's view, which many people do, that this has been totally corrosive to American democracy, at a minimum, the corrosion shouldn't be coming from outside the country.
Right.
If we're going to have corrosion, we should do it ourselves. and I think the identification of people outside the country would go and will go a long way to cleaning up some of the more hateful things, because I do think foreign actors are constantly trying to find ways to destabilize the American people and our government. And some of the way we do that is divide us against ourselves. So good question. And I think that's an offshoot that is getting some pickup now because of what X just did. Now when you click on your profile, you can see where you are. And a lot of people have been revealed in the last few days.
I would add that about the comment section too, on any social media. It was not a graduate of this university. I was talking to a young woman just got out of my college, University of Texas. She's in her early to mid 20s. Where do you get your information? TikTok. I said, really? First, I didn't even go into that's controlled by the Chinese Communist Party. How do you know it's true? And she said, well, I look at the comments section and that sorts it all out. And I said, the comments section is all Russian bots and Chinese bots and North Korean bots and Iranian bots. That's not going to, I was howling into the wind. But being more sophisticated about who is feeding you this, I think, is a really important thing. And I think you're right. X made a wonderful contribution by adding that.
That was a smart decision.
Yeah. Last question. I've been informed. We got to clear the hall.
Hi. Well, first of all, thank you both for coming to speak with us today. I have a comment on some of the perceived hypocrisy I see coming from the Republican Party, and specifically Donald Trump. There's a lot of kind of grandstanding about democracy and the rule of law, but then you have President Trump saying he wants to, or considering running for a third term, posting an AI-generated photo of himself as a king. You have him up in arms about political violence, but then when Minnesota legislators were assassinated, he didn't make a statement about it, didn't put the flags at half-staff. And most recently with the Epstein files, Trump's name is repeated frequently in there, and yet he kind of pushes the blame off to former President Bill Clinton, Larry Summers, some of these other Democratic figures there. Is there kind of this hypocrisy in the Republican Party, and why are the two sides held to different standards?
Let's go down the list. Give me the top of your list. I'll take them one by one.
Third term.
Third term. He's not running for a third term. He's been very clear about that. He will not be on the ballot in 2028. Next issue. Political violence. Well, he was almost assassinated. If anybody knows anything about political violence, it's Donald Trump. The man came within a millimeter of dying at the hand of an assassin during his own campaign. And another person set up shop outside of his golf course and intended to kill him. And so, as it relates to political violence, I will also just say on the example of, Minnesota, every single Republican in the U.S. House of Representatives voted on a resolution to honor the speaker there in Minnesota and to condemn that violence. You cannot say the same about the Democrats on Charlie Kirk. Many of them voted no, and many of them voted present. Why? Because their base would have been enraged had they voted for something that was perceived to have been in support of Charlie Kirk. So I think when you're discussing political violence and Donald Trump, you can't gloss over the fact that the man was nearly shot in the head and another assassin tried. And his own party has been pretty clear on the floor of the House this year about how they feel about violence, but the Democrats have been much more muddled. What's the next one? Epstein files. Well, he signed the bill to release them, and they're supposed to do it within 30 days. And I think everybody wants this to be a story about Trump and Epstein. And the reason it wasn't in the news for the last 7 days is because you're fixing to find out it's a story about Epstein and Democrats. That's my view. But we'll see when the documents come out.
So he was really protecting the Democrats. We want to thank Mr. Trump for protecting my party. I'm sorry, that's baloney. Sorry, I just don't believe it. I don't believe Donald Trump gives a rip snort about protecting Democrats from being exposed in the Epstein files. I just don't. I'm a skeptic.
I don't know that he cares about protecting Democrats or anybody else. I'm just saying that the prevailing narrative on this story is that everybody wants this to be about Trump and Epstein, and the only thing we know right now is that Larry Summers was soliciting dating advice from Epstein, and we'll see what else comes out.
Right. I do think too many people on my side and in the media are jumping to conclusions where there is none. That's why I want transparency. I do think they should come out. If it hurts Democrats, good. If it hurts Trump, good. I think those victims have a right to the justice they seek, and this is what they want. But with that, I want to thank Scott Jennings. The book is A Revolution of Common Sense, How Donald Trump Stormed Washington and Fought for Western Civilization. Scott, thank you again for coming to Grounds and for joining us in this debate. Thank you, Scott.
Really good.
That was great.
Really good.
Thank you.